Imagine waking up early in the morning and looking out across a huge open field. At first everything seems calm. The wind is blowing gently. The sun is slowly rising. But then you notice something strange in the distance. Dust. Lots of dust. Then shapes begin to appear. Soldiers. Thousands of them. Soon you realize the truth. An army of 30,000 soldiers is marching straight toward you. Now imagine turning around to look behind you and seeing only 1,000 soldiers standing with you. No reinforcements. No backup. Just 1,000 people facing an army 30 times bigger. Most people would run away immediately. And honestly, that would make sense. When the enemy is that much bigger, running feels like the smartest choice. But these soldiers didn't run. Instead, they stayed exactly where they were. They decided they would fight. And what they did that day became one of the bravest last stands in history. But to understand why they stayed, you need to know something important. Their job was not really to defeat the giant army. Their job was to slow it down. Behind them were towns and cities filled with families, children, and people who were not ready for war. If the enemy army moved too quickly, those places could be taken before anyone had time to prepare. So the 1,000 soldiers had one very difficult mission. Hold the enemy back for as long as possible. Even if it meant fighting an army much bigger than theirs. Luckily, the battlefield gave them one important advantage. They were standing in a very narrow area, something like a tight mountain road or a small valley between hills. Think about trying to push 30,000 people through a tiny hallway at school. Everyone would get stuck, right? That's exactly what happened here. Because the path was narrow, the huge army couldn't attack with all its soldiers at once. Only smaller groups could move forward at a time. That meant the defenders only had to fight a few enemies at once instead of thousands. Even so, it was still a very dangerous situation. When the battle began, the big army felt very confident. They looked at the small group in front of them and probably thought the fight would be over quickly. The first group of attackers charged forward. But the defenders didn't move. They locked their shields together. They raised their spears. Archers prepared their arrows. And when the attackers reached them, the defenders pushed them back. The attackers were surprised. They tried again. Another wave rushed forward. But once again, the defenders held the line. Then came another group. And another. And another. Slowly, the battle turned into something very different from what the attackers expected. Instead of a quick victory, it became a long and exhausting struggle. One reason the smaller army was able to survive was because they were very well trained. Good soldiers are not just strong fighters. They know how to stay calm, follow orders, and work together like a team. Each soldier protected the person next to them. When someone became tired, another soldier stepped forward. When a shield broke, someone helped cover the gap. Instead of fighting like individuals, they fought like one giant machine. Because of this teamwork, the smaller army became incredibly difficult to break. The battle went on for hours. The sun climbed higher into the sky. The soldiers became tired. Their arms hurt from holding shields and weapons for so long. Dust filled the air. People shouted commands and warnings. The ground beneath their feet became messy and slippery from all the fighting. Still, the line of defenders refused to break. For the massive attacking army, this became very frustrating. They had more soldiers. They had more strength. Yet they couldn't get through. Every time they attacked, they lost more fighters. And every time they stepped back, the 1,000 defenders were still standing there. At one point, things almost went terribly wrong. A small section of the defensive line started to weaken. Some soldiers had been injured, and suddenly there was a tiny gap where the enemy might break through. If that happened, the attackers could pour through the opening like water through a broken dam. For a few scary moments, it looked like the defenders might lose everything. But the soldiers reacted quickly. Commanders shouted orders. More defenders rushed to the weak spot. They raised their shields and pushed forward. Slowly, the gap closed again. The attackers were forced back once more. That moment may have saved the entire defense. While all of this was happening on the battlefield, something very important was happening behind the defenders. Because the 1,000 soldiers were holding the enemy back, people in nearby cities were getting ready. Walls were being strengthened. More soldiers were being gathered. Plans were being made. In war, time is incredibly valuable. Even a few extra hours can help people prepare and protect themselves. So even though the defenders were not destroying the enemy army, they were doing something just as important. They were buying time. Something else interesting began to happen during the battle. The huge attacking army slowly started losing confidence. Imagine being one of the soldiers in that giant army. You know you outnumber the enemy 30-1. You expect them to run away as soon as you approach. But instead, they keep fighting. Every attack fails. Your friends and fellow soldiers keep getting pushed back. Soon you might start thinking something like this. If we can't defeat this small group, what will happen when we face their full army? That kind of doubt can spread quickly through an army. And when soldiers begin to doubt themselves, battles become much harder to win. Over time, this battle didn't become as famous as some other famous fights in history. Many people remember the biggest victories or the largest empires. Smaller moments of bravery are sometimes forgotten. But historians still study this stand carefully. Because it teaches an important lesson. Having the biggest army doesn't always guarantee victory. Sometimes the most important things in battle are discipline, teamwork, smart strategy, and courage. Those 1,000 soldiers understood that they were facing almost impossible odds. They knew the enemy army was far larger. But they stood their ground anyway. They fought together. They held the line. And because they did, they gave their people the time they needed to prepare. That is why their story is still remembered. 1,000 soldiers. 30,000 enemies. And a last stand that proved courage and teamwork can sometimes be stronger than numbers. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more amazing moments from history, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And if you think this story was unbelievable, wait until you hear the next one.